I'd like to discuss one piece of responsa from the Shoot Mimamakim, written by Rav Ephraim Oshry, who actually died in New York in 2003. He was born in 1914 and was educated in the Slobodka Yeshiva, and I believe he was ordained as rabbi there. And during the Holocaust, he spent most of his time in the Kovna ghetto. And at a certain time, he became the greatest halachic authority in the ghetto. And believe it or not, people were asking halachic questions all the time. And just, before we get into this specific piece of responsa, so just, as an inspiration, there are many things that I remember this past Tisha B'Av, actually. Sometimes it's, fasting, it's hard to do, like, in-depth learning. And also, as you know, on Tisha B'Av, it's prohibited to just, learn anything. You can only study those parts of the Torah which have a certain level of mourning in them. So I was reviewing some of his responsa, and it's just unbelievable stuff, like the kind of things that come up. I just can't imagine those kind of questions coming up in any other situation. And just a couple of examples. So in the third part, in his eighth responsa, so he's asked if one may say Kaddish for a non-Jew who has saved Jews. And we know usually the Kaddish is recited in honor of Jews who died. People say that for their parents. It's a tremendous benefit spiritually. So are you allowed to do that for a non-Jew? And he answers that not only are you allowed to, rather it is a mitzvah, and you must go ahead and do so. So that's I find that one interesting piece. And another piece is where he discusses a very interesting concept, which actually I was just reviewing that today. I noticed it's brought down in the Haggadah that Rav Rimon put out. So somebody asked him, Rabbi, how am I supposed to say the bracha every day? Sho'a asani eved, right? Thank you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for not making me a slave. The woman says, Sho'a asani shifcha, thank you for not making me a slave. So how am I supposed to say that when I'm, exactly that? And Rav Oshry answers him that when we say the bracha, that we are not slaves, that is regarding our spirits. It's not talking about our bodies. Throughout the generations, Jews have been enslaved in different forms and ways. But when you say that bracha, you are declaring to the world, you're declaring to yourself, you're declaring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and overall, more importantly, he says you're declaring to your oppressors that they cannot enslave you. They can make you do certain things. They can force you into certain types of labor, but they cannot take away your inner freedom, which is a matter of the spirit. So, a person who's able to give such depth and inspiration, you see the combination here of Jewish law with leadership and inspiration, that I think that he's really an amazing figure, and his responsa is definitely worthy of studying, both for its halachic content, but also for the historic insight that we see, like, firsthand. It's a very unique way of learning history about the Holocaust, rather than just pick up a book, even if it's like in a biography or autobiography. Here you have, like, it's so it makes it like come so much alive when he's asked this question, and like he tells you how he feels and what he was thinking at the time and the way he responded. And when you just close your eyes and think of those situations, I find it to be extremely unique and like no other type of book that I've read about the Holocaust. So again, he ended up coming to New York, where he died in 2003. Rav Ramon, my rabbi, told me that he met him. He actually got the books directly from him, and it gave him tremendous joy to know that people were reviewing his work, again, both for its halachic content and as a memory, as we're doing now on Yom Sho'a. So, especially now that he's dead, the sages tell us that whenever you study the Torah of someone who is deceased, so it's as if his or her lips are whispering in the grave. So, hopefully this will be meaningful for us and also, for his neshama. So take a look here at the first source, which I translated, which is the introduction to his piece of Responsa, in the first part, 6th Responsa. On the 6th day of Mar Cheshvan, 5702, right, which was 1941, 2 days before the horrifying Black Day of the Kovno Ghetto, when some 10,000 men, women, and children were taken away to be butchered, every one of the ghetto dwellers saw his or her bitter end coming. At that time of confusion, one of the respected members of the community came to me with tears on his cheeks and posed a question of life and death. He felt that he could not bear to see his wife, children, and grandchildren put to death before his very eyes, for the German sadists had specific systems for extermination. In order for the murderers to enjoy the suffering of their victims, they would kill the children before the eyes of their parents, and the women before the eyes of their husbands. Only after satisfying their bloodlust in the sadistic fashion would they put an end to the suffering of these men. Because he felt certain that witnessing the horrible suffering of his loved ones would cause his heart to fill with terror and his soul would leave him. So notice what this person is saying. He's saying, I can assure you that if I have to endure such a terrible, tragic experience, I will die just from that suffering. He asked whether he could terminate his own life earlier to avoid witnessing the death of his loved ones. This was aside of the fact that he would be spared a horrible death of great suffering at the hands of the accused murderers. So he has here both emotional suffering of what he's supposed to go through before his death and the actual death, where it's not going to be just simply that they're going to execute him, rather torture him to death. He would also gain burial among Jews in the Jewish cemetery in the ghetto. So to sum it up, this person is saying, this is such a terrible way to die. And I'm asking you, Rabbi, am I allowed to commit suicide? So that's, just sort of let that seep in, even before you get into the answer. Many of Rav Oshri's pieces of Responsa leave you like so shocked and dumbfounded when you read the introduction, and he shows you the question that he was asked, that sometimes like the answer you're not even that interested in the answer because you get so stuck on the situation, and it's almost hard to believe that people were asking these kind of things. And even a person in such a desperate situation comes to the rabbi to get counseling and not just decide on his own what he's going to do. So what would you think? What, just off the cuff, both within Jewish law, you think, is there anything that we can say? And secondly, even if you have no opinions or knowledge of Jewish law, what do you think educationally should be said to a person in this kind of situation?
I mean, the Chayav Ahem is technically obligates you to remain alive despite all of that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I mean, usually that verse is used as proof that you're allowed to violate all other commandments except of the specific 3 that you're not allowed to. But generally, any violation you're allowed to transgress if it's going to save a life. That's what we usually learn from B'chai B'hem. So,
Look through.
Giloi Erot Shvichut Damim Avodah Zarah, which is adultery, murder, and idolatry. And which, by the way, includes many details, because many details can be considered either murder. By the way, there are certain things that we don't always think of, but can be considered murder. There are certain things that can be considered either adultery or idolatry. So it expands a little more. Those are the big 3. That's so it's interesting that you should bring up that verse. But okay, I hear your direction. It seems like intuitively you're saying no. Like I don't think that there's room for that.
Well, my answer is we use it usually as a leniency, but it might also be, in this one case, a stringency. You are literally obligated to live, even if you know all the horrible things that are going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, I hear that. Anybody else? Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of learning about this in my Talmud class, and we've learned that unless it's a Shat Hashmad, the only mitzvot that you're allowed to violate, that you're allowed to get killed for are the big 3. But it depends whether or not the Holocaust is Shat Hashmad.
Right. That's a very good point.
I've learned that unless it's conversionist, then it's not Shat Hashmad. And the Nazis weren't trying to convert the Jews, they were just trying to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
So technically, with that said, then he wouldn't be allowed to kill himself.
Interesting.
And also we've been learning about our cases where you want to be a martyr, so like going to shul, even though if by going to shul it would mean that you're going to get killed, but just committing suicide, it's not even for the purpose of doing a mitzvah, that probably wouldn't be allowed.
Interesting take. Is this Dr. Katz?
Yeah.
Interesting. No, it's just interesting to know like the kind of things he's discussing. So, if I understand you correctly, you're saying maybe we would be able technically to find room for leniency if we could define the Holocaust as Sha'at Hashmad, just to fill everyone in case you're not in Dr. Katz's class. Sha'at Hashmad means that if the oppressors come and try to convert all Jews, and therefore they say, as a rule of our religion, you are not allowed to go ahead and keep Shabbat, go ahead and eat kosher or whatever it is. So you have to keep these laws, even at the cost of your life. That's the Sha'at Hashmad. So you think if we could define the Holocaust as Sha'at Hashmad, so maybe we would be able to say here that one would be able to commit suicide.
Well, I don't know, because in this case, they're not committing suicide to do a mitzvah. They're just committing suicide because they feel like they would just die anyway.
Right.
So it's
right.
Like
I mean,
even if it was a Sha'at Hashmad,
okay.
you wouldn't be allowed to.
Right. So I get, I could argue if I would take, that specific angle, that I could say that, each and every time that the enemy came and murdered Jews in the way that they chose to do it, so that was a chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name. So in order to, in order to try to minimize that and not give them that kind of pleasure and ability to really desecrate, so this person is going ahead and committing suicide. I'm just playing devil's advocate, because he actually does not take that take on it, and I really, to my knowledge and everything that I've studied meanwhile about the Holocaust, it was not from a religious point of view, meaning, I don't know enough about what generally the Nazis' theology was, but I don't think that it was like that they didn't have a problem with our Judaism. On the contrary, even if a person would say that they're not, I'm not going to keep any commandments, that they could care less.
Yeah, like Gentiles who were like 1/4.
Right. Which even according to Jewish law are not really considered Jewish, so they consider. Okay.
So where is the line there? Is it? Do they actually have to get you to convert to something else, or is it just stopping you from doing what is Jewish?
So it's even in detail. It doesn't have to be that they're fully trying to convert you, but the Talmud gives like an extreme example. It says that even if they say that as a religious law, you have to wear a certain color of shoelace, and you're not allowed to wear a different color. So even for that, if doesn't mean that you go ahead and commit suicide. You have to wear, your specific color that you've always been wearing. And if they come ahead and say, you better change your shoelaces or we're going to kill you, so you have to go ahead and.
But is making you, let's say, eat pork, for an example, that's not telling you to become something else. It's just telling you not to be who you are.
Right. Exactly. So if it's as simple as that, just two drunk Gentiles and 200 years ago in some village, are getting a kick out of trying to have a Jew eat a piece of pork, and they say, if you don't do it, we're gonna kill you right here and now. So he has to go ahead and eat it, because just for their own, they're getting a kick out of it, and that's all there is to it. If, for instance, the government comes and says, we're going door to door with platters of pork, and, by your eating this, you're going to show that you believe in our God, or, they make some kind of religious argument about it, and they turn it into like a theological issue. So then that's considered Sho'a Tashmat. So it depends what the motivation of the oppressor is.
So you must be this, and not that you must not be this.
No, I understand. Right. Let's put it to sort of maybe this is what you're trying to say, meaning behave in a certain way instead of be a certain person.
Right.
That's a difference. Is it behavioral, or are they trying to change my essence and my inner set of beliefs? So, I don't remember now if this really could fit in with the entire issue, but it would seem to me, I'm just thinking of it right now, that basically this whole concept really stems from the prohibition against idolatry. By your doing something that to the oppressor has some religious value, so in a sense is identifying with his idol. So that could be that it's stemming from that, but I'm not sure about that. Okay, so generally we must know, and this is an important concept, and anytime I speak about suicide, so I feel that you have to be 100% serious about it and very direct. There's absolutely no way you can find in Judaism a leniency towards committing suicide. That, we're going to talk about different things or whatever. It might sound like, hey, he's wrong or whatever. I'm saying that because, unfortunately, there have been cases where people who are extremely knowledgeable but are mentally ill have tried to find certain sources which, at first glance really may seem extremely problematic and strengthening their ideas, but absolutely not. Every single person has a holy neshama and must keep it. And this doesn't mean that this person shouldn't get help. On the contrary, any person who is experiencing issues should go ahead and find help, and should never be looking into sources to try to find leniencies that will go ahead and feed that person's mental illness. So this is learned from the verse here in Bereshit that I brought. I'm going to skip it there. Time is running out a little bit. In Tanakh, we find an interesting story about King Saul. So King Saul was fighting the Plishtim, and when he saw that the war is over, he's losing, and he realized that he's going to be captured by the Plishtim and tortured to death, he committed suicide. At first, he actually asked one of his servants to kill him. That servant, if I remember correctly, did not at first. It says, so it says that the servant did not do it. He himself fell on his sword and committed suicide. So there's some interesting sources here in the Midrash and in Talmud that seem to say that the prohibition that we learn from the verses in Bereshit, in Genesis, do not apply to Saul. What could be the possible reason for that? Any ideas? King Saul, king of Israel, sees that the enemy is coming and he commits suicide, and the Talmud tells us, it's possibly not really included in the prohibition. Yeah.
I think it's because he's a king, and there's some passage about the dignity of a king allows for certain leniencies in this regard.
Oh, interesting. Right. Okay. So that is really a direction that I would be happy to go, because again, I said something very definitive before. There's no leniency within Jewish law to commit suicide. Boom, and that's there. Whatever you remember from this class, if you forget everything else, that's one of the most important things. And I say this, God forbid that nobody here should ever have any kind of mental illness. Definitely not to that, to this kind of fatal point. But also, when we meet people who are experiencing these kind of issues, and I spoke to a psychologist about this once. One of the most important things, and there's been, this both makes sense, but also there's research done on this. What we have to express to the person is, first of all, obviously, compassion and understanding and trying to reach out and help. And for sure, you're not supposed to take care of things like this on your own. You're supposed to help that person reach professional help. But one thing is for sure, you cannot give them the feeling that if they commit suicide, so we're going to respect that. We're going to really feel for them. We're going to understand them. That's something very important, because it's almost inconceivable that people really think this, because they're thinking, if I commit suicide, so people then are going to be accepting of me. They're going to understand, because I'm such a burden on society. And therefore, once I do that, people are going to respect me. And they're not thinking, wait, are you going to feel anything? Like, where are you exactly when you die? It's not rational, but that's a very important feeling to convey to people, is that, no, this is not a respectable thing to do. I respect you now. I understand you, and I'm not judging you, and I want to make sure that you get help. But I will not respect such a thing, and there's no room for such an action. So, anything that would really minimize it. So saying he's a king, that's one thing. A second option is what we mentioned before, that possibly I could claim the whole issue of not committing suicide can be, in a broad sense, viewed as the prohibition of desecrating God's name. God created man, and he's giving you life, and a person goes ahead and takes it. It's like you're going against God. Like, who are you? Why are you deciding against God's will? But once the enemy is about to capture the king, which in and of itself will be a tremendous desecration of God's name, so maybe this is an indication that this is what he has to go ahead and do. It's by divine decree, possibly. So whatever the situation is, we see that maybe under certain circumstances we can accept what Saul did. There's another story here in the Talmud about Rabbi Hanina ben Tradion, who was being executed by the Romans, and he asked one of the Roman soldiers to to hasten his death. And the Roman soldier responded to him and said, "Wait, if I do that, Rabbi, so am I going to have a portion in the world to come?" So the rabbi said, "Yes, you will." And he hastened his death by removing the wet cloths that the Romans had placed on him, and that soldier himself too. The Talmud says that he jumped into the fire, and the Talmud ends by saying that the divine voice came out of the sky and announced that both Rabbi Hanina and this soldier are entering the world to come. So we see here, two things. One, the rabbi is about to die, and he's hastening, and he's asking to hasten his own death. Although notice, he's asking somebody else to do it, meaning he's advocating it in a sense, what we would call today euthanasia. But he's not himself taking action. But I think it's pretty clear that we're not in favor of euthanasia generally. And we have the second part of it is that the soldier himself jumps into the fire and kills himself, and yet a minute later we hear this voice saying that he is entering the world to come. So in another situation, which again, each and every one, I'm just throwing out these kind of, these sources, each and every one of these sources really should be analyzed inside out to really try to define and understand what exactly are these extenuating circumstances. We have some awful pieces from the medieval ages, from the rabbis who were talking about pogroms. And are you allowed to go ahead and kill children whom you think who you know will be converted? And just dealing with that kind of thing is a terrible concept that I think it's unthinkable. But they all, they go ahead and argue, and amazingly, we do find some who say that it is a possibility. But generally, the accepted opinion was that you're not allowed to go ahead and do something active, but passively you can let death occur, and by which you will be preventing these children from becoming from being converted. Now, another interesting source that I found in this is I believe Rav Oshry himself brings this, is the Yam Shel Shlomo, Rav Shlomo Kluger, who writes that you're not allowed to go ahead and commit suicide if you think that you're not going to be able to withstand the enemy's torture, and therefore you might go ahead and convert or do anything else that they ask you. But then he says, if what they're trying to do is they're trying to either find other Jews whom they're going to either execute or torture. So once it has to do with other people, and so for the protection of other people, a person takes his life because he's afraid that he's not going to be able to withstand the torture, and therefore give up people's names or in any other way jeopardize their safety. So he says maybe it's a possibility. He doesn't really give a definitive answer, but he brings up that might be a possibility. So, regardless of this question that's before us regarding the Holocaust, so there could have been such situations in the Holocaust where a person is trying to escape, realize that he's about to be captured, and once he's captured, they're going to torture him to find out where other Jews are hiding. So, according to this, if a person really is afraid that he's not going to be able to withstand that and possibly give up other people's safety. So Rav Shlomo Kluger said that there is a possibility that he can go ahead and commit suicide. So these are just like a few sources to throw out there, and what Rav Oshry discusses. All this, to me, again, brings up more of like the kind of emotion and thinking of like, wow, what did we go through over span of 2,000 years since the exile. We have here stories starting from executions in the time of the Romans, through pogroms during the Crusades, and ending with the Sho'a. So, it's really amazing that the rabbis throughout the generations were dealing with these terrible questions. And Rav Oshri's bottom line was, he did not go ahead and say to this person, yeah, you can go ahead and commit suicide, it's a good thing, but he sort of did just what I did now, is like bring the sources and leave it ambiguous and sort of with an open door and say, you have these sources if you really want to understand them in a certain way, so there is room to understand that you can't commit suicide. But then he ends, and with this we will conclude the last translated part. Yet it seems to me that it is not permissible to go ahead and publicize a psak, a decree, that one may commit suicide in such a case, because we would then be assisting the evil killers, may their name be obliterated. And this matter constitutes a chilul Hashem, desecration of His name. So notice, I mentioned this a few times, that that's one of the main issues that we're dealing with. Is this a desecration of His name or not? So he's saying, by publicizing this piece of response during the Holocaust, that in and of itself could have brought a desecration to God's name. Why? Because it may seem that the Jews do not have faith that God can save them from the impure and cursed hands of the killers. May their name be obliterated. The murderer's main intention was to create commotion among the Jews, which would generate despair and uproot all hope from their hearts that God will redeem them. So he's saying maybe on a personal level to this specific person, so he's saying, I'm sort of leaving the door a crack open for you to go ahead and interpret it. I cannot go ahead and say to you, you're allowed to kill yourself, but I cannot also say it's 100% impossible in this situation. But to turn that into a national decree and going ahead and teaching the masses about this would create a terrible desecration, because, as we know, so many people, it seemed so improbable that they're going to survive, and yet, unbelievably, they did survive. So, as a whole, take a certain percentage of people who did survive the Holocaust. So you're saying, if everybody's going to go ahead and commit suicide, that's basically saying we're all doomed. It's impossible. God cannot save us in these under these circumstances, and therefore we're just giving up. And that would send a terrible message to our oppressors, that God forbid we do not have faith. So to conclude, it starts off with a tragic question, continues with an ambiguous answer deliberately, and concluding with whatever the bottom line on the individual level is. You should not go ahead and preach this in times of tragedy. And to me, one of the most important messages here is that Jews we're dealing with the sanctity of life, and generally, our whole Jewish tradition, both on the level of halakha and on philosophical level, even in these terrible cases and most most harsh situations. And this can be an inspiration to us all to be able to, whatever we do encounter in our life, to know exactly where to be able to draw our our knowledge and inspiration.